Hi, I'm Bobby Shea. Welcome to Honoring Him in the Craziness of Life. Each month, we explore a different theme about how we can honor God even in the craziness of our lives. I can't wait to chat with you about this month's theme. Well, Gretchen, this month on Build a Sister Up and on BobbyShea.com, we have been talking about faithfulness all month long. We've been talking about how we are faithful to God, how we are faithful to the things that He has called us to, and how He has been faithful to us. And privately in our Build a Sister Up group, we've been just talking a lot recently about God's faithfulness to us. You said some really amazing things on our group chat that we had going on yesterday. And I'm just wondering if you can share some of that about just the way that you've seen God's faithfulness in your life lately.
Well, I think my view of His faithfulness has changed over the years. I think when my kids were younger, some of these thoughts began to really build as a mom. I don't think I started out as a worrier, but I think it's almost like a byproduct of the role of being a parent. You sort of become a worrier.
Right.
And I think I started out, and as the kids would venture out, it was me desiring God's faithfulness of protection, protect them from, protect us from, like I was trying to keep all of the problems and issues away from our family and away from protecting them. Away from affecting them. And then come high school, two of our kids really began to struggle. And I think it really changed as I was grappling with, what could be done. I was sort of desperate even for God to fix our situations.
Mm-hmm.
And He really honed in on me, Gretchen, if I change the situations, then you won't change. And I was like, that's a hard one to take.
Right.
Because, in the black and white scheme of things on paper, it was two children that needed to change their ways. What did that have to do with me? But it was amazing that as I've grown through that process, I began to understand that was actually God's faithfulness to all of us, that we went through some of those times as a family. And though they were devastating, in some seasons, sometimes they lasted years, the struggles that we had with two of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I look back now, and not only was God faithful to me in allowing me to experience that, because it helped me put to death some things that I needed to let go of, like unrealistic expectations, letting fear and anxiety have a hold on me, hanging on to little faith, when if you'd asked me, yes, I want great faith, but what does it take to grow your faith? Well, I didn't want that. But all of that God allowed because He knew I needed to let go of those things. And so that was His faithfulness to me, but it was also His faithfulness through the boys, that, what I see that God has done in them and through them and for them since that time. I don't think He could have done that had they not gone through what they went through. And I can honestly say that, the peak time that we were suffering was 2013. And here it is 5 years later. And the fruit from that suffering with me, with the kids, is exponential. Mm-hmm. And so I actually am able to look back on that, as hard as it was, that was God's faithfulness, because we all needed to change. And it was only through sort of the crucible that you'll actually begin to examine yourself and let go of some things that you need to let go of.
And I think it's, as moms sometimes, or even just as women, it's like I'm willing to accept difficult situations in my own life because, boy, I want to grow, and I want to just grow in my faith and grow closer to Christ. And I know sometimes those lessons are learned through suffering, but when you're watching somebody else, like your kiddos or something, and it's growing things in them and they're learning lessons, that's still hard to watch somebody that you love
Yeah.
That almost requires, to me, more faith to watch someone you love walking through something difficult.
Oh, I
and
absolutely
stepping back
agree.
and letting God work in their lives than
Right.
in our own lives to just let that happen. So
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
that's
I
the
can
challenge.
take my own suffering, but watching, especially the children suffer, or just anyone you love, and when you can do nothing about it, I think that's some of the hardest kind of suffering. When you've exhausted all resources, you got nothing left to try. You've tapped out everybody you know, you've tapped out ideas on what may fix it or help. I mean, when you're tapped out and they're still suffering, you know, it's just, it was almost like a squirming. I could not take it. But that was where, by allowing me to go through that, God was showing me that there were certain things that made that experience worse. Like not realizing that by asking God to fix things for my children, or if I tried to do that, that was not serving in their best interest. He sort of reminded me how unrealistic my expectations were. And he showed me that through reading through a very familiar parable about the disciples in the boat and when Jesus was still on the mountain. And it said that the wind and the waves were against them. And in the midst of this season, he showed me, Gretchen, you're like the one in the boat. And I was at the oars straining against the wind and the waves. And what I was trying to do was really impossible. I was trying to avoid all of the waves. I wanted to try to maneuver the boat into a perfectly calm sea setting. And if you've ever been to the coast very much, you know that sometimes you'll wake up and you look out at the water and it is still. There's no waves and it's calm. Well, what he taught me, that unusual situation at the beach is not the norm. But I was trying to make that our norm as a family. And he really pressed in, Gretchen, the waves are the norm. So you trying to position your boat and row your family to where none of the waves are going to rock your boat is unrealistic. And you're just exhausting yourself. And he also taught me, what is that benefiting the children? I'm trying to get him to protect them from the hard stuff in life. When really God's faithfulness is not from the hard things hitting us, but through them. And so it really changed even how I pray for my children. Instead of God protecting them from things, I pray, God, suit my children to their circumstances, not their circumstances to them. And he taught me that with, I think it was Acts chapter 3 or 4, when the James or Peter and John, I think, were threatened by the very same people that crucified Christ. And so they went back to the disciples and they told them, the rest of them, about the threat. And the shocking thing is, not only did they pray about the situation, but what they prayed. They didn't pray for protection. They didn't pray that God's, basically justice would come down and smite the wicked people. They prayed for boldness. They actually prayed, God, basically suit us to these circumstances, equip us so that we can be faithful. So I've changed the way I view God's faithfulness, but it's also changed the way I think what he would expect of me as we're going through trials. And one of the things is the way I can be faithful is just to keep doing the right thing no matter what. It doesn't matter what the kids are doing or not doing or anyone else in our life. I'm always held accountable to do the right thing no matter what. And that is faithfulness. And then perseverance. I can't give up. No matter how hard it gets, I still need to get up, start my day with the Lord, and press on, endure. And so that reminds me of David. He did not give up, even though he was anointed to be king like around 15, but he didn't ascend to the throne of Judah till he's, mid to late 20s, and then to Israel, I think, altogether as a combined kingdom until he was 30. But he had to persevere. And then faithfulness, I think, when you're suffering like that, you need to have gratitude. That's part of being faithful. And that I learned from Jesus when he was breaking the bread. and praying over the baskets that he was fixing to hand out to the people, he thanked God at the point in time when they still didn't have enough food. So their supplies, their needs were unmet, yet he thanked the Lord for what they had already. And so gratitude was going to help me as I went through hard times and understanding how I could be faithful toward God.
I love that. And you said in our little private chat that we had, you said something, and now I'm going to try to remember what it is, and I hope I get it right. But I think that you said something along the lines of, you talked about perspective and how gaining perspective is almost better than gaining a change in your situation. I know what you said. Change in perspective is better than change in your situation sometimes. And how God working those things in your heart and teaching you these lessons and changing the way that you view problems and the way that you view even just the spiritual growth of your kids and of yourself. Learning those lessons, changing your perspective that way has been more beneficial for you than if you would have changed your situation in the first place.
Well, it ties back to peace. You know, what I thought I was looking for in trying to steer our family boat into calm waters was security. You know, I wanted a secure life for us. But really the real definition of what I was after was peace. And so if I'm attaching peace to my circumstances being resolved, then that's conditional peace. But having gone through some trials, the fruit of that is God has shown me my peace can be unconditional, and it takes a change in perspective. And so as I meet a situation that may be challenging, I immediately sort of run to him and ask, you know, how are you viewing this? Because I've already learned if there's a wrong way to view it, usually I can view it the wrong way. And he has such a better perspective on things than I do. And so a change in perspective is really better than a change in the circumstances, because then my peace is unconditional and not tied to any sort of resolution, because it doesn't take long in life to figure out that you may be one of the people that your situation never gets resolved. You know, I think we all know just enough about life to sort of be scared to death. You know, that could be us, or this situation over here, that could be us. And I just don't think that God wants us going through life fearing every wave that's going to come our way, but he wants us, like he called Peter out, to be able to rise above the waves and to have peace no matter what. And if Jesus says, you know, in this world you're going to have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. I mean, that is a powerful truth to live by. You know, and it sort of came home to me last night. We were at our fellowship group meeting, and one of the questions we were asked and discussing as a group was, what is a hopeless situation that you may be dealing with right now? And, you know, I sat there and I thought, I just thought, you know what? I don't have a hopeless situation. And not because life is perfect, but because I don't think anything is hopeless anymore.
I love that.
You know, I think because how far down in a pit we got, and I see what God has done in hindsight, and how his faithfulness is just magnified in the hindsight of how deep in a pit we were and what he did in spite of all of that, then that teaches me there are no hopeless situations. It's only a matter of time. That's what it is. And that's, I think, why I am driven to just follow hard. You know, I take that back to Psalms 63:8, where it says, David said, my soul follows hard after thee. And I think it goes on to say, your right hand upholds me. And, when he wrote that psalm, he was actually in the middle of a desert. He was towards the end of his life. He was older. He had been chased out of his kingdom by his son Absalom. So his life was threatened. His kingdom had been commandeered and taken from him. As he left town, people were ridiculing him, and this one guy was throwing stuff. I mean, it was, I'm sure it's a movie.
It was a challenging situation, to be sure.
So he gets to the psalm, and it says, Lord, and he's in the middle of the desert. So what comes to mind when you're in the middle of the desert? That you're thirsty, right? I'm going to get it real quick because it's so interesting what comes out of his mouth. He says, "Oh God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water." And I'm thinking, okay, man, he is in the middle of the desert, and what is he thirsting for and longing for in the dry and weary land where there is no water? God.
Right.
He wasn't talking about necessarily, you need to take care of Absalom. I mean, he was, what I need more right now is not necessarily the resolution to all my problems, but to just abide in God, to draw near, to, position myself underneath the shadow of his wings so that no matter what's going on, I am fortified. I am not protected from it. I'm protected in it and through it.
I love that. I was reading in Matthew earlier, and whenever I was reading the section where the disciples are in the boat and Jesus is asleep and the storms roll in, and the disciples wake Jesus up and are like, "What are you doing sleeping? Stop this." And he rebukes the wind and the waves and stops it. And as I was reading that section of scripture, I thought, I wonder what lesson he wanted to teach them that they stopped short of receiving. Or, I wonder if Jesus had something for them to learn, and in calling on him in their fear and in their lack of faith, in calling on him to stop the wind and the waves and to still the sea, did they miss something? Did they miss a lesson? And I think sometimes in our own lives, like the waves start to pick up a little bit and we're like, okay, this is cool. I'm fine. And then the waves pick up a little bit more and we're like, stop it. Jesus, stop the storm. I don't want to walk through this. And, I think sometimes our best lessons, some of our best growth, I know if I look back on my life, the times that were the most challenging, when I've walked through really difficult situations, my faith has grown. I have learned more about God and his character and his sovereignty and his goodness and his faithfulness in those situations than in all of the good times combined. I think that's part of our fleshy nature, is that when times are good, sometimes we shift him a little bit to the back. And then when we're in those difficult situations, we call on him and we want him there and present. And he's so good that he does draw. I mean, he's there all the time, but he just draws so near and proves himself faithful time and time again and teaches us those lessons. But sometimes we just don't want to walk.
Isn't it a paradox?
It is.
I mean, because he sort of creates moments in our life for our neediness of him. And it's in order to grow our faith and to grow us up and to show us what we have in him. But yet, what do we desire? We don't want neediness. We don't want situations that make us desperate. And it's actually interesting how desperation is really some of the best moments we will go through, because it has a way of stripping away the unnecessary and fortifying what should remain.
I agree. I love that. And I think even if you just use people as your example, and I know if I think back on people who I know, people who have shared their testimony or who have situations in their life that they have, brought to light that we can see, and I look at them and I think, man, they've been faithful. It's because God has walked them through really difficult situations, not just because life has been easy and they have strong faith, but it's because I've watched them endure, and I've watched them, like you said, persevere, and I've watched them trust and have that solid faith. And I think, man, I want that. I want that so desperately. And I know he constantly is growing it in me as I walk through trials and I walk through tribulations. And like I said, in our flesh, we just do not want that. But I love that you have the wisdom of looking back and saying, I love when you said hindsight's 2020, because we do look back, and I know personally, I can look back and say, in situations that in the middle of it, I was just like, Lord, get me out of this. I do not want this. But I look back and I am grateful for those situations because of what they've worked in my life and in my heart and in my faith.
Right.
Like you're kind of that same way.
Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing how God uses what we will want to avoid the most for our good. I mean, it goes back to Romans, 8:28, that, he'll use all things for the good of those according to that are called according to his purpose. So, but we just have to give him time and remain faithful and keep following hard after him as we're going through it.
Right. Well, we're going to wrap up really quick, Gretchen, but I know that you didn't want me to share your book, but I have it right here on my table.
Okay.
And the reason I have it right here on my table, it's called Press On, Encouragement to Keep You Moving When You Feel Overwhelmed. And the reason that I actually do want to just look at it for just 1 second is because I love the story on how and why you wrote it. I love the story about seeking through the scriptures for lessons learned. So will you share that just a second about how the book came to be?
Yeah, it's actually just, a small little 2-week devotional where I pulled some of the posts from my blog that dealt with perseverance. And I have a larger manuscript that deals with this topic, in a broader sense than that book does. But the reason I needed to write on those lessons were because those were lessons I needed to learn. I'm a fixer. And I think that when I got to the end of myself, when I couldn't fix the struggles we were having as a family, and as a Bible teacher, I needed to figure out, okay, now what do I do? When I have no control over my circumstances, how do I persevere? Because I need to come to terms, God may never fix these situations. So what do I need to believe and follow in order to be able to persevere? And as I read through the Bible, there were just plenty of lessons. And it really goes back to a change in perspective, like we talked about earlier. I'm amazed at how when God changes our perspective, it can be as good and as powerful as if he had changed our circumstances. So those were just some of the lessons that I gleaned as I went through our struggles. And it details the perspective shift based on some Old Testament passages.
I love that. That's so good. Well, before we wrap up, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. And let's just say somebody watching this is experiencing the trial, a difficulty, even just a situation of unknown in their life, or maybe life is good. Maybe things are wonderful, but they are just wanting to be more faithful themselves, and they're wanting to learn more about the faithfulness of God and just experience him more. Give me just a little practical advice for somebody like that.
I would say that you have to draw near to God. Our close following after him is key to being the strongest that we need to be to face what comes our way. So for me, that means getting up early and I start my day with him. Yeah. Secondly, that means I am in the Word. I love the chronological Bible because it's 365 days of reading. Each morning, whether I'm in a Bible study or not, each morning, if I'm reading through the chronological, I know what I need to do that day. So there's a plan waiting for me as I come to my chair to have my quiet time with the Lord. So regular meeting time, first thing in the morning before life has a chance to start taking from you, you need to get filled up. Then being in the Word, and then seeking to apply everything that you're learning. Be in the Word, ask the Lord, God, I desire a passion for you and your Word, because honestly, Bobby, I did not enjoy the Word. When I was in my early to mid-20s, I was a little Southern Baptist girl that I knew I needed to read the Word, but I really didn't enjoy it. And I can remember hearing Beth Moore give the lesson that she heard someone that she really admired and saw that they had a love for the Lord and his word, to pray for it and ask for it. And so in my mid-20s, I began to ask the Lord, give me a passion for you and your word. And I'm telling you, he did it. And I mean, I went from not liking the word to loving the word. So, whenever life gets hard, I know that it's something on my end. It's not that I need to blame God, but I need to go back to the word to figure out, how am I not living life according to his commands, which let me know without a doubt I should be able to get through this. Not that he's going to resolve it, but I should be able to persevere and endure and just have the fortitude necessary to do those things. And it's found in the word.
That's so good. We were having, in our private group, Build a Sister Up box, we were talking about just the characteristics of God, that he is faithful to being, that his word says he is faithful to, that we constantly return to. And I had posted the question to the group, what characteristic of God's faithfulness do you constantly return to? And I actually was listening to that Vox before we got on our call, and I was just blown away by the different characteristics that we all cherish and that we all need in the different times of our lives. We talked about God as a provider. We talked about God as a father. We talked about him being sovereign, just being in control of everything. And we just dove into so many different characteristics of God. But the reason that we know those to be true is because we're in his word. And I love what you said. I was actually talking to another girl in our Build a Sister Up group the other day, and I was saying how last week was a crazy week for me. It was, daylight savings. I don't know if it threw everybody else off, but I had a rough time. I am like you. I'm in the word first thing in the morning, and I had a rough time getting out of bed, and all week was just totally chaotic. And it was probably Thursday before I realized my week is chaotic, not because of all of the things that are going on this week, but it is because my heart has not been where it needs to be. And I had overslept, and then I had hit the ground running. And before I knew it, I was falling into bed at the end of the night, and I had just been void of God's word all week long. And we need him to speak that peace into us and that joy into us. We need to be able to remind ourselves of his goodness and his sovereignty and his faithfulness to us, and to just trust in those characteristics. And it's, Ann Voskamp calls it soul amnesia. So quickly we forget, right. in the span of just those few days, life had gotten so chaotic that I found myself feeling really chaotic and frustrated and upset. Right. And it was because I wasn't grounded where I needed to be every morning. And my heart hadn't had that renewal because I hadn't taken the time to dig in. So I love that. Well, Gretchen, thanks so much for taking a little bit of your time today to sit down and chat with us about faithfulness.
Oh, my pleasure.
I appreciate it. And I will be sure to let everybody know to stop by your blog and your website and to check out all of the things that you post, because you are an encouragement. You are faithful, girl, to all the things that you are constantly doing. When I was thinking this month about what theme I wanted to share and faithfulness, you were one of those people that just popped straight into my mind, because I see you continually faithful in what he has called you to. And you said something that I really love, and I think that you exemplify it really well. And I know I have brought this up several times in conversation with you, but you said, I just want to be faithful to what he has called me to, if it helps one person or if it helps 1 million people, whatever God is calling me to, however big or however large, I want to be faithful to him. And I see that in you constantly.
Well, thank you.
I love that about
you teach us. He's a joy to know. And, the closer we are to the Lord, that's the best life now. That's what makes life worth living. It isn't having, all the blessings of money or health or, all of life the way we want it. It's found in our relationship with him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's where we learn to be faithful. It's where we see his faithfulness, and it's just where we experience life in the fullest. I love that. So.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Gretchen. I sure do appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I had such a wonderful time talking with Gretchen. She's such a sweet friend, and she constantly challenges me to be more faithful. I love the way that she has given us some really practical ways to honor God through faithfulness. You can hop over to her website, GretchenFleming.com, to follow along with what she's doing there. She posts wonderful encouragement all the time on social media and on her blog. You can also check out her book. It's called Press On, Encouragement to Keep You Moving When You Feel Overwhelmed. And as she said, it's a 2-week devotional that looks at faithfulness. So it would be such a great resource for you. You can purchase that on her website. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for looking at ways to honor him in the craziness of your life.